Hi, Andreas here, from Capgemini's Applied Innovation Exchange in San Francisco. There are a few topics that stay a top priority for us. Cybersecurity is one of them. We just put together an exciting panel discussion on the topic of cybersecurity trends in 2023. As you may know, at the AIE, we work closely together with Microsoft under the tagline Applied Innovation Built on Microsoft Cloud. One of Microsoft's cybersecurity solutions is Sentinel. Sentinel provides security information and event management, orchestration, automation, and response. We reached out to Microsoft's Chief Security Advisor, Cyril VOISIN, and invited him to a panel discussion with Capgemini's CISO advisor, David O'Barry, facilitated by Anne Saunders, Director of Cybersecurity Partnerships at Capgemini. So with that brief introduction, please enjoy.
Good morning. Welcome to the panel today. My name is Anne Saunders. I am the Director of Cybersecurity Partnerships at Capgemini. We're here today with two respected peers in the cybersecurity space on the Capgemini side as well as on the Microsoft side. We wanted to get together today and talk about, what's going on in our world as we've embarked on a new year. It's 2023 now. We have a lot of things happening with regards to the economy, macroeconomic headwinds, uncertainties with regards to changes in regulatory requirements, privacy requirements. Businesses are changing how they're operating. An example right now we have in the United States, we have the executive order initiative around zero trust. So that's making companies think about how they deal with what their security posture is and how they handle it and what they build out of it. We also are seeing changes with regards to the supply chain, regulatory requirements around that. There's a lot going on. And as usual, the CISO is at the center and trying to formulate a strategy that's focused on a goal of always shoring up security posture and being ready for what's next, as well as being agile at the same time to deal with changes as they come on and come about with the threat landscape and just changes in the business environment and whatnot. So that's kind of the background of our discussion today. So with me, I'd like to go ahead and introduce you to David O'Barry and Cyril VOISIN from Capgemini and Microsoft. So David, would you like to introduce yourself?
Thanks. Sure. David O'Barry. I'm with Capgemini. I'm the external CISO from Capgemini for a large global life sciences corporation. I've got 20, actually about almost 30 years in the industry now. We'll say 25 plus. I was on the customer side for almost 20 of those, 14 as a CIO CISO before being a CISO was cool. And they didn't really even have that title when we were dealing with that at that point in time. So my additional experience in this has been over on the vendor side and the consulting side with McAfee, with Intel, and with with VMware before Capgemini. So I've been at Capgemini now for 3 years.
And good morning, my name is Cyril VOISIN. I'm a Chief Security Advisor at Microsoft. That means I engage with CXOs and CISOs about modernizing their security strategy. And I've been with Microsoft for 25 years, 20 years into security, compliance, and identity. And I'm very excited to have that conversation today.
Thank you. And as mentioned, I'm Anne Saunders. I manage the Cybersecurity Partnership portfolio for Capgemini. 20 years in the industry, from the engineering side to the business side. Have seen a lot over the years. So I'm happy we're here today. So let's jump into it. First question, kind of following on the framework with which the whole topic is the macroeconomic environment. What are we seeing? The headwinds, the challenges, things of that nature. So we've all been going through our leadership meetings and our planning meetings at this point. So Cyril, David, when you're in these discussions with customers and at the board level, what are the areas of concern or what's piquing your interest when you think about what the cybersecurity strategy should be? David, you want to go first?
Sure.
Go ahead.
So yeah, I think it's unfortunately in most of these situations, as it usually is more with less. The problem is that not only is the workforce not really there for the cybersecurity side as it should be at the skill level it should be necessarily. There's a lot of openings. Also, the economic aspects of current things are very tight from the people fearing recession, different things that are going on right now. So you're seeing a situation where you're having to figure out in a right shore type situation, whether it's onshore, offshore, the hybrid aspect of that. How do you actually do more from an ops perspective, whether it's SecOps, AI ops, DevSecOps? How do you leverage newer technologies to try to create a situation where your people can really focus on the things that matter to the business and not so much the things that are have always kind of taken up a great deal of their time. So, AI, ML type situations come into those types of environments at this point in time. But I think the challenge is, again, to do more with less, understanding that the threat environment itself is exploding constantly, and you're combating different things, whether it's new challenges, again, with AI, things like with phishing and different things like that. So again, what we've got is an exploding attack surface, not enough people to really solve it all the time, and then also concerns about economic aspects.
Yeah, and if I can build on that, at Microsoft, we're observing that there was an acceleration of digital projects with the pandemic.
Sure.
And somehow we got ahead of ourselves, if yes. I can say. And now people are really trying to do more with less. They are trying to optimize what they invested in. And that means that we're seeing constraints on budgets in IT. And usually security is a fraction of the IT budget. On the other hand, what we see is that the cybercrime is currently estimated to be 6 trillion a year and expected to grow to 10 trillion in 2025. So the problem is not going away. And I think leaders have understood that they still need to invest. And I see a lot of investment being maintained because there's a lot of technical debt on one end. Second, there is a new way of working, and we do surveys on this tension, which is kind of a paradox where you have managers that say, I don't know if this remote work thing is efficient. And on the other hand, you have employees who say, I'm exhausted. People are putting meetings back to back on my day. And therefore, there is a need to reinvent how we work and how we secure the work. What I see also is a lot of resiliency work has been done. Almost all the customers I talk to nowadays, they think they figured out how they could be withstanding a ransomware attack. And I'm not going into the details because if you look into the details, you would find ways where things are not completely addressed. And on top of what you mentioned, David, on AI, which I think is complete new wave and revolution that we really need to think about, is the supply chain security. We've all seen SolarWinds attack. Log4j, for instance, was an issue that we had where hundreds of applications were embedding this library and sometimes without mentioning it. And we've seen with the Ukraine war last year that the satellite communication of a particular brand was suddenly sabotaged and you had impact in other places. So I would say what I'm saying is that people are really forced to be creative, to use their budget smartly, let's say, but security is not going away.
Yeah, I think to build on that a little bit, I think the challenge also is that as Cyril's saying about the supply chain, third-party vendor management, really, really critical to a situation, but not something necessarily that has been looked at with the cyber aspect in mind at points in times, right? How something is actually fabricated, how bombs are created, not bombs, but bill of materials are created, not bombs. How these things are created and how they are pulled forward and what they're actually constituted by, what it makes up. He was mentioning Log4j. A lot of people just had no idea, and so now have to get more granular. That means that their partners have to get more granular, and you're starting to see compliance requirements for that, literally from the federal government, DoD to begin with. But when it starts in DoD, it definitely rolls to DHS and then on down at that point in time.
And if I may add a final comment on that, the World Economic Forum released in January 2023 a cybersecurity outlook document. And that was quite interesting to see what the business leaders and the cybersecurity leaders are thinking. So I think everyone recognizes that cyber risk is important and needs to be managed. And I think the confidence that the cybersecurity specialists or leaders have is increasing, which is a good sign. But on the worrying side, they all expect a catastrophic event in the next 2 years. And that's typically the kind of things that shows that we cannot divest into the cybersecurity efforts.
Yeah, and I think in that situation, as you know, Cyril had referenced this earlier, they got out ahead of themselves. They got out over their skis, whatever the term is that you say that. Basically, they made a lot of investment in the situation, and not unlike in the 90s and 2000 situations where you kind of created a situation where you wanted ubiquitous. Everything needed to be ubiquitous, right? All over the place. Stuff, push it out, push it out, push it out. And yet now it has to be, again, we have to refocus on the fundamentals and have secure ubiquity. You know, and when we talk about zero trust and things from the edge, so it's end to end, right? How does this follow the user? How do the capabilities to use whatever you're doing at that point in time follow you in a secure manner?
Mm-hmm. Yeah, very, very valid point. So, you know, following that thread, so we're looking at what's ahead, what we probably need to do. Are you taking stock of what tools you have and how to leverage those tools you have to kind of address, like, for example, what's going to happen with the supply chain or what we think is going to happen with the supply chain? Do you have that with the technical debt that's there, that investment's been made, or do you see yourself investing in new technologies, different technologies to deal with scenarios that are, you know, as David said, kind of, you know, the ubiquity and what we've seen in the past repeating itself with maybe a little bit of different flavor? Do you see the tools you have being enough, or are there areas of investment that you're going to focus in on or be able to focus in on in 2023 based on the headwinds and based on, you know, the forecast of what we're the forecast in general around threats and catastrophes and situations we're going to run into?
Yeah, Cyril, I'll hand over to you in a second. I think the challenge in this situation is knowing what you do have. Yeah. Enumeration of your tools, those baselining aspects of what they do and the gap analysis associated with it, basically the RACI of your tools. What is the responsibility for various tools? How much? Because there's a lot of shelfware. And unfortunately, what we do at times is, I've been published on this before in general, this is one of the things that's driven me crazy, is we chase the shiny. Okay, it's the new, it's the shiny, it's the, it's really, really cool looking. But when we get back to it, we recognize that if we don't have the fundamentals to it, if the foundation has not been square, that we will, no matter how shiny it is, it won't solve the problem because it's not end to end. We're not blocking and tackling like we should. So back to basics matters a great deal there. And I would also say to know what you have, enumeration of the environment. And I'm talking about from ground up, including all of the, endpoints of your server, what all this is, but including your tools, and rationalization of that from the ground up is very important and does not go down like it should at times within the industry.
Yeah, and before going to the tools, I think I want to remind everyone something they know. The result of security is the result of people, processes, and technologies.
That's right.
And probably processes are like the most important things. And we have so many processes in companies where we have a good policy, but we don't do anything about it. We're not really implementing. So I think that's one of the big challenges. There is also a lot of tools that might be unknown or unused. And, yes. We see that all the time. Something was purchased and it's not implemented. So what's the value really to the business at the end of the day? One of the key drivers I see for deciding whether you want to have new tooling, new solutions or not, is really your maturity with dealing with the risks. Today, if you're moving to the cloud, for instance, it's a big driver for reconsidering your approach. We mentioned the zero trust philosophy, that could be one aspect of it. But securing multiple clouds is something that is important. And if you add new innovation on top of legacy, you create a complexity that might be difficult Absolutely. To manage. So that's something really you want to take care. And on your point of knowing what you have, which is a key element, it's the dream of everyone to have a list of the assets, that you have, right. and the CMDB usually is missing. But what I see is a lot of projects which are around the data security lifecycle. So know the data that you have, because we have all massive repositories of data that we don't know exactly what it contains, and that's a regulatory risk. It's a business risk, and so on. Trying to tag this data, protect it, and manage it in general. So that's an initiative where I see the budgets going down, but everyone is like, okay, I need to do something about the data.
Right.
And the last one that I see a lot is the modernization of the Security Operations Center. People realize that if you don't have visibility on your assets in real time about what's happening, there's no chance you're going to be able to protect. So you need to be able to detect and respond. And in order to do that, most of the time, you need to beef up your existing tools, or you need to rethink the tools and maybe the operations of the tools.
Yeah, and I think in a lot of situations, as Cyril's saying, you're talking about, policy and translation into operations, really. How do you translate that, right? And I think, people have best practices, but I've always said that best practices are great, but best actionable practices, something that is consumable and visceral, that wins the day in all of these situations. Because otherwise, if it's too complex, and as Cyril pointed out, you get into a situation where you're stacking something that wasn't great outside from a security perspective outside of the cloud, and you jam it into a cloud, it turns to a really bad situation very quickly. So you have to be cognizant of what you're doing, and at least make sure that the risk is highlighted, because otherwise people will just kind of absorb it and they're not really accepting the risk. It just kind of like seems to disappear into the air, but it never has. It's still there. It's still tech debt that has to be really recognized.
So to add on to that, two things that were mentioned, that Cyril mentioned, that, David, you and I have had discussions around. So the volume of data is continuing to increase, and it's going to continue. It's going to be never ending. So that's going to make that real-time visibility for your security operations team even that much more difficult to manage and keep in real time. So now we have the entry of all these automated tools within the Security Operations Center. And so I really worry, and I wonder, you have data, growing data, plus automation. Does that equal a new type of risk we need to try to manage? Are we thinking about that?
Yeah, I think the challenge is to make sure that you direct that towards the actual solution here. And here's the thing: is that if you actually take Azure, for instance, in the cloud, and you have Sentinel, and you have all these. If you inject AI in the right ways with these different streams and stuff, you can take people and you can close your MTTR, your mean time to remediation, your mean time, to response really quickly. Some of the studies that come out of Microsoft are astounding in what you can do. But you have to have that policy and procedure, and how you do that, what that foundational aspect is, laid out. You can't just expect to go in and say, "Oh, I'm going to do AI ops or AI, SecOps." What does that really mean? And so I think that is a key thing, is to make sure that you have your framework that you're working within, as Cyril's pointed out as well.
Yeah, and on your point on automation, I think we are confident to automate only the things that we trust. And right now, the level of automation is very low, if we are realistic.
Sure.
So there is a huge improvement, a huge, let's say, efficiency growth that can happen with automation, but that will take time. Yeah. The second thing is, on the growth of data, most of the data in the future will be created by machine learning models. So we've all seen the release of ChatGPT, for instance, where it can generate things and so on. But that's difficult to grasp right now, because right now the data is from sensors, is from people and so on. But the enrichment and the creation will come from algorithm. So we're going to be flooded. And this is where the importance of being able to assist the humans who have the right judgment is going to be paramount. And of course, with like any technology, we've been mentioning AI a lot, but AI can be used for good, but also for bad.
That's right.
And we've seen like exploits or like phishing emails written by AI that looks like perfectly contextualized. So that's also why that's probably going to be a trend for the future. Maybe not directly in 2023, but probably in the next couple of years.
Yeah, and I think Cyril and I'm sure I'm sure Cyril's briefed on this before, but think about like concepts of deepfake and stuff like that. That we were talking about that a long time ago, but we're really kind of really beyond that in the situation now, to where when you think about ChatGPT and stuff like that, there's a difference here, right? This is a different level, and now you're talking about the ability to now take a a 3 or 4 or 5 second voice situation. Microsoft's got some crazy technology, and turn it into where you can speak the entire. Yeah, I mean, it's crazy.
No,
right?
no, that can be definitely scary. But at the end of the day, I think we are seeing a trend where misinformation, disinformation is going to be very important. And we've seen that with the war in Ukraine, for instance, and Microsoft has this a service that is specialized into studying the propaganda campaigns and all that. But it's not maybe going to be a country against a country. It could be against the reputation of your company. And that's why this is something when we think about threat intelligence, we're going to be needing to muscle up to also look at other aspects than just like people who want to attack you technically or to do like phishing and so on, but also who try to give a bad reputation to your company.
And the challenge is, remember, in this situation, it's how do you make it visceral for the user? Because we are talking about people, process, technology, right? So there's only so much. I mean, the people piece of this still has to be factored in a way. It's not just skill sets. It's how do you make something visceral? And one of the examples that I've used in my entire life, when we coughed into our hand, or we did something of that nature, right? What changed that? SARS changed it originally, and all of a sudden you started seeing people cough into their elbow. How do you make it visceral on that knowledge side? How do you make it stick about being aware? And this is a gap that exists in the education system in general, in even the workforce itself, because ultimately the weakest link, as with anything, is that human interaction oftentimes. And so I think that how you take that continuum and how you come across that continuum with that knowledge and make that stick is very important going forward.
And we need to have a positive mindset about the users and the employees, because we tend in cybersecurity to say, look, you were bad, you clicked on this phishing email. But no, I can click on a phishing email tomorrow.
Me too.
Okay, so we need to recognize it's hard, but also try to help people have the clues about what needs to be done.
Yeah, and I was like in 2008 or 9, I actually, one of the chapters I wrote for Information Security Management Handbook, I told them, you can call these users whatever. You can be all aggravated, because this was even worse back then, right, Cyril? The disdain, it seemed, right? But you can't be a no person. As a CISO, you can't be no. You have to be, so here's what I understand, so help me get you there. It has to be a continuum to get them there. Otherwise, they will go around what you're doing. They will cut you out of the deal. You will not have input, and then you're really in a bad position. Because ultimately, the people that the users are what drives the business productivity for the most part. They are the producers in that business. So treat them like they are. They are your customers.
And this applies, I think, more generally to not being the no person. This applies to the business too. If you look at the World Economic Forum, I think it's only like 20-30% of companies that consider security as an enabler, which is what we are really trying to do. Like we want to be the people who say how things can be achieved, how we can innovate, how we can go fast and grab market share and seize opportunities. But in many cases, we've seen as like slowing down the process, saying no, and people will try to avoid us. So that's the reason why we need to be very supportive of people, and we are the people to make things happen in a risk managed way.
And I think that's it's part of the DNA associated with that. I'm
having flashbacks of being ushered out of meetings saying no over the years.
So I think it's because when it's part of the DNA of the organization, it changes it, right? Because it's not some bolt-on. Bolt-on just doesn't work for security. If the mindset is, I want to be securely productive, right? So, and the term I came up with was secure business operating efficiency a long time ago. But how many minutes a day, how many secure minutes a day can I give an end user to do something that is productive for the organization? And if they see that, they recognize that you're not going to be just this curmudgeon saying, no, you're terrible, whatever. You are an enabler for them. And as Cyril points out, that is critical.
Well, and I see it on the Capgemini side. In my role, working with go-to-market strategies and things of that nature, I truly try when I have the opportunity to wave the flag and be like, well, let's talk about how we're going to deliver this securely, and remind the sales executives and account executives that this is actually a lift for you, because we're bringing to the table a proactive, protective stance that's in our customers' best interest. So really, really trying to change that thought that we're the guys that always say no, and call those guys if something goes wrong. Other than that, leave them alone, and try not to talk to them too much.
It's like buying a car, right? If you bought a car and every and 10% of the engines caught on fire in the middle of the road, you would not buy cars, right? It would be very bad. And our percentages are way worse than that at times with regards to cybersecurity. So we have to help them realize that it is an enablement, but we also can't be old world about this, right? We can't be that person that goes, you can't do this. The key is to always be thinking ahead of that, which is, here's what they're probably going to want to do. So how do we actually work with the business leaders to get them there?
Yeah, exactly. So I'm going to kind of, weave in the next question I had on, for the panel. And that was kind of, going down this path. Okay, so we have all these different variables and different domains we have to deal with when we're looking at overall security posture. Where's the focus going to be this year? It's kind of sounding like, well, if we look at people, process, and technology, we're probably going to be continuing to focus on the user or the people aspect of it. But is there any thoughts from both of you on, any particular areas you want to focus in on this year, or you feel like you should because the threat landscape is changing, or just, as I mentioned in the beginning, the business operation environment's changing?
Yeah.
Cyril, please take that.
Do you want to start, Dave?
No, you can start this time because I think you got a really great insight based on what you were talking about.
Yeah. So I think that I don't see something new that we don't know about really, but I see things where we need to do more. Like that, there are the typical investments around ransomware, phishing, identity theft, and all that. That's not going away. And just to give some numbers, at Microsoft, we manage some infrastructure as a service for identity, and we measure like 900 password attacks per second. We have like 60,000 tokens being stolen per month that we can detect and so on. So that's not going away. And I think people are maturing. We went from passwords to now multi-factor authentication, and people are realizing that we need phishing-resistant multi-factor authentication, and that's what the executive order somehow in the US is doing. But on the things that are less, let's say, top of mind for most of the manufacturing customers, I think it's the OT security, where you have a lot of manufacturing plants with legacy systems where you would dream of not connecting them. But the business needs the connection because you need to measure the production, you need to measure to predict the maintenance and so on. So I think this is an area where I see a lot of work being done, and also on how you delegate to users. A user in a cloud world can have an application that is asking them, do you want to grant me access to your directory, to your data, to your files, blah, blah, blah. And they will say yes. They will happily say yes, because they have a task to be done. And it's important from a governance perspective that we understand when they can say yes or no, maybe have some pre-cooked answers, and also that we're able to detect, okay, this application, which I have no idea what it's doing, has access to this kind of data. And that's going to be important from a cybersecurity perspective, but also from a regulatory perspective.
That's actually what you just said, brilliant, because if you think about it, when you think about phishing, you kind of show, well, you clicked on a phishing email, but the butterfly effect of clicking on give me access to all of your files or whatever that is is not pervasive in the education aspect, in the training aspect. I think that's very important going forward, is what happens when I do this? What does that really look like? What would that mean if it was something that was not proper, right? And then also to kind of enable the people to understand that better. You mentioned OT, and I happen to be that's probably one of my primary specialties, which was kind of the convergence of IT OT, and especially when you're talking about the Purdue model or IIoT. When you're talking about the Purdue model in this situation, companies connected when they didn't even recognize that they were connecting, and they flattened it all out, unfortunately, in a lot of situations. So there are some very flat networks with some very key situations, as you've seen over the last few years, where if even at Purdue level, 2, 3 and above, if you get hit, it doesn't matter that they couldn't get to the floor. They're gonna lock you down in that situation, and you're gonna have to restore. And we've seen hundreds of millions of dollars and billions of dollars, in damages over the last 5 years in that situation based on that. So I think going forward, what you have to look at is the holistic look of, look, we know these cultures are different. The IT and OT worlds are different, unfortunately. So it's kind of like a religious thing, in a lot of ways. From the OT perspective, it's safety, right? That's always been what's pushed. It's safety. And I believe safety in this situation, while confidentiality is critical, I also believe safety is integrity plus availability with confidentiality. So I think you have to stop talking about the CIA triangle when you're doing this, because the OT people just kind of shut you down at that point in time. So I would say that the integrity matters in general. And a lot of times on the CIA triangle, integrity kind of it's been like the weak brother or sister, it's been like a little brother or sister. But ultimately, that matters more than anything, that you know that you do what you say you're going to do and know that you did it and it can prove that you did it. Because
on a bank account, that's important to know that the wire transfer was.
That's right.
Maintaining integrity.
That's right. So, integrity matters. All of these things, surgery, all of these different types of things for medical devices. These medical devices have very intense calibration aspects. You cannot be guessing about that. When you make prescription drugs, you have to be exact. These are things that, and when you get into the automated world and you mix IT and OT, sometimes that gets really, really, really confusing.
Well, I think adding to that, what's interesting is a lot of the tools that are coming out that are for supporting and managing OT environments live in the cloud, and they're being built as cloud native applications,
which they freak out about.
Which always makes me raise an eyebrow. Like, okay.
Yeah, I will tell you that in this situation, some of the bigger issues that we have not been able to solve at times, and on-prem and even kind of hybrid to begin with, things like DLP and stuff like that, those things really solve really well with clouds. I mean, because you can kind of get this visibility across the continuum that you often couldn't do with an on-prem environment. I mean, it's really hard. You'd have to put a whole bunch of boxes everywhere, but mixing SASE with Azure, and you can really start to get some fine-grained visibility. And I always say radical visibility allows you to make agile choices, which is what matters.
And so in my experience working in oil and gas industry and manufacturing and so on, air gap networks are a view of the mind. They don't really exist. There is always a connect, even water management, where someone found like, oh, the connection is too slow. Let's buy a DSL line directly from this plant to another place.
I so know that.
Let's like back up a little bit and get a kind of the forest instead of the tree view. Let's go back to talking about zero trust a little bit. I want to bring it up because it's going to be a hot topic this year, and there's a lot of companies that are making a lot of claims. In my role, I get to hear about how every technology vendor has a zero trust strategy, and they do zero trust when I'm doing my reviews and whatnot.
Just like they were all e-commerce, whatever, whatever. It's always like something. We were ZT. Yeah, got it.
Yeah. So I want to hear from both of you. What is your definition? What's Microsoft's definition?
Contextual least privilege. Basically, yeah. So that's really, and I think that when you look at it, it's making sure that the right people have the right access to the right resources at the right time for the right reasons. And it's that, to me is it's least privilege in context, and it has to be dynamic a lot of times, and that's where we kind of fallen down on a number of those things. But I would also say, and I'll hand over to Cyril after this, is that there's a lot of these tools when you talk zero trust, and I get. I did the Gartner certification on zero trust. These tools exist in different places. There may be some gaps, but you're not outside of the bounds of what a zero trust environment looks like, because you can repurpose the tools for what you're talking about, for what your business needs. So, and I'll hand over to Cyril on that.
Yeah, no, so I'm not a native English speaker, as you can hear from my accent. And for me, zero trust is very badly named, first of all. I think it should be called explicit trust, because that's exactly what we are trying to do. We're trying to not make assumptions about the fact that this device in front of me is owned by my company, so I should trust it. No, I should verify before I will trust it. And the same for network controls. It's not because I'm on the corporate network right now that I should be trusted. We would need to verify. And I like the way the NIST put it into the Zero Trust Architecture document, where they're basically saying when a subject wants to access a resource, zero trust is about making sure that you put the protection closest to the resources. Yes. So you're going to protect your asset as close as you can, and not just do ownership or network controls. You're going to use everything that is available to you. That means identity, that means infrastructure, that means data protection, and so on. So the definition of Microsoft is written in front of me. I can read it to you if you want, because I don't know it by heart. It's a proactive approach to security that uses adaptive control, and continuous verification to prevent and respond to threats more quickly and efficiently. So somehow this is linked to what you were saying about the dynamic aspects, the least privilege. We usually say there are three principles. So one is assume breach, assume compromise, that's the mindset that is driving every security professional. And the second one is least privilege that you mentioned. And the third one, actually, I think, which is really the new one in Zero Trust, is this notion of verifying explicitly. When you make a connection, you want this access control to be dynamic and to be based on risk. And you want this also to be revocable. So it's not like I got my access. So what I'm describing here, just to be very clear, is the vision. In the implementation, we are still far from that as of today. But when we look at how we want to do it, I think and two last comments before I give you back. I think visibility is important. We already spoke about that. I think when the pandemic hit, it was incredible to realize that some companies lost completely visibilities to some workstations because they were not connecting via VPN. So that's not Zero Trust. You need to have connectivity to some form, to have some reporting. You want to maintain an excellent user experience. We're not here to do security for the sake of security. And finally, I think when we think about Zero Trust, the first two things we do in terms of foundations, we verify the identity of the user, like MFA, things like that, and we verify the endpoint they are using. And on top of that, we will add additional signals. From which country are you connecting? Which application, which data are you trying to access? Is it normal, not normal, and so on.
Right. And it's easiest, form, if you go back to even network access control from way back, it's the concepts really, especially 2.0 and 2.5 and 3.0 NAC, they really kind of align very similarly. So it's not a new thing. Right. Is that your opinion as well, Cyril? If you look at the way it is, it's dynamic.
I was working on the NAC version of Microsoft called NAP at the time.
There you go. I remember that.
802.1x and so on. Yep. I think the beauty of Zero Trust is trying to not have an agent everywhere and still trying to figure out what kind of trust relationship will I establish with something that I don't fully understand, don't fully know, and let people work. Also, I think it's going to help mitigate, or maybe not stop, but at least slow down some attacks, because that gives you an ability with the telemetry to have some signals so that you can make a decision.
It's processing all these data points, though, that becomes the real killer, right? We couldn't do that really before, and now we're able to do that more, right? From Microsoft's perspective, because you can correlate these different data points, you've got a situation where now you can start to really kind of tune it down to when someone needs access to it and when they don't, and that may be that they have access to it when they're here, but they don't when they're here. So it's that contextual aspect.
And Anne, maybe to your point earlier, I think it's important to mention Zero Trust is a philosophy. It's not a product. It's not a project. You don't buy Zero Trust. You have a mindset that you're going to try to apply security everywhere, and you're going to do everything we said before.
Well, David brings up a good point, and we've talked about this before. It's how do you ensure security follows the asset, whatever the asset is. Yeah. That's always been kind of my go-to and my vision, from a philosophical perspective when I look at Zero Trust. Okay, the security has to follow the asset. So what does that mean? And this brings me to a thought you have, Cyril, I think is very interesting, is the Zero Trust lever, the revocation and the management of the revocation along the path, or the path that the data and the user takes when they're doing whatever they need to do and connecting to whatever they need to connect.
It's not necessarily revocation, I want to say, but that is the ultimate. It could be, but it's also turning down the capabilities, like of how much access you do have to it, right? So there's a continuum there, a granular continuum, I think.
Yeah. So go ahead, finish your thoughts.
The open group, like they were the people who did the Jericho forum, and now they've published, and they are saying exactly what you were saying. It's a data-centric and asset-centric approach to security.
Right.
And so that kind of brings me to the one of the last questions I had, or items I wanted to talk about is, the other big trend is managed service, right? Everything because of the fact that we lack the talent and the people within the cybersecurity market or business, and just the magnitude of everything happening with regards to data volume, with regards to the necessary, real-time visibility security teams need to make sure they, take something down and stay in front of attacks. And zero trust, of course. Are we going to see zero trust turn into a managed service in some way, shape, or form? And also, the larger trend, what is happening with managed services? Is that really where everything's going to go?
I think the integration between managed service partners is critical in this situation. I don't think everybody anyone can do this by themselves. I don't care if think about it, like Microsoft has some of the most amazing tools for getting this visibility aspect, getting the correlation, Sentinel. It has the ability to do a lot of stuff within Azure to give you this visibility. But if you can't ingest that, or your partner cannot ingest that when they're doing this for you, or they trap your data, you have a hard time getting your data back out into another aspect, into another platform, whatever. That's a real killer, right? So I would say that when you're thinking about it, you look at a company like Microsoft, who's very open about what they do for the most part, and you're able to actually interact with and use what they do for what they do in the best, right? And these managed service partners need to focus on areas that they do really well, and then be the block that plugs into your organization like that to amplify what you can do with the limited resources you have. That's the model that a lot of people don't. They want to be everything to everybody a lot of times, and there are really areas they should stay within, and they could provide great value doing that.
So, David, you brought up Sentinel a few times. Cyril, do you want to kind of share your perspective, of course, but maybe in the context a bit of, what's happening with Sentinel as a product? For
so Sentinel is a cloud native CM and which has some SOAR capabilities. It's a leader into the Magic Quadrants of Gartner's and Forrester Wave. It's been released only back in 2019, and last October in 2022, I was on stage with a very large international insurance who just migrated to this solution, and they are using an MSSP. And I think one of the learnings from them that I found very interesting was that they're using MSSP where they want to have a hybrid SOC. That means they are going to staff people from their team and people from the MSSP, so that they can have the best of both worlds. Because the MSSP sees so many situations. They are really on top of their games about the automation and the efficiency and all that. But the people from your company, they have the knowledge of the business. So it's very, very good for contextual analysis. And the other thing I think, which is important in modern MSSP contracts, is that you should not be negotiating addendums all the time, every time you want the MSSP to do something new. I think what people really appreciate today is kind of like a contract where the borders are kind of fuzzy, and whatever is going to be asked is going to be accepted. Because we don't know, like 2 years from now, what the people from the MSSP should be doing.
So I think a partnership there is what you're talking about, right? That's critical.
Exactly.
So go ahead. Sorry, I didn't mean.
And just to finish on the learnings from this big insurance company, they're using Sentinel. They were happy with it. They're also using a technology called ADX, which is a data lake where you can store a lot of information, because for let's say compliance reason or hunting, you don't need everything in Sentinel, which is more expensive than the data lake technology. And one of the key learnings they shared is that they needed to hire someone to do FinOps. That means you need to have someone in charge of cost management of your security solution in the cloud, because everything is on a pay-as-you-go basis. And you need to ask yourself all the time, okay, we're consuming more here because maybe we have more attacks and then therefore more logs. Are we happy with this, or should we do differently? Do we need these logs? Do we need to use another technology? And I think that's what is somehow changing the game in terms of modern SOCs. Sentinel is fantastic, but you need also to operate a bit differently, because it's not like I pay everything in CapEx and I'm done. No, you will need to look at your OpEx.
Real quick, I think it's it's the old 80-20 rule in a lot of ways, right? 80% of this stuff, and I call it, boutique. I call it an industrial boutique. Like if you're a consulting company or whatever, 80% of this is going to be the same. That's why you need to get to that, that kind of distilled standards-based approach, right? Then that other 10 to 20%, right? And it's got to be focused down to what you're talking about, which is this partnership with MSSP, this hybrid SOC, because then that's where the knowledge really starts to empower that, and where you actually get a lot of the orchestration and I call it autonomic security, right? The autonomic security comes from that knowledge between those two organizations and how that pushes things forward. Then you start plugging in AI ops. and AI, SecOps, and you start to see some really crazy, like, savings in time and just mean time to resolution.
And because it's offered as a service also, it's important to understand that what you're going to get in 1 year or 2 years is going to be more than what you're getting today.
Right.
So that means the platform is growing with you. And so when, for instance, a software vendor like Microsoft or a cloud service provider is adding new functionality, it's up to you to decide I'm going to adopt or not. But it's not like I'm going to do a project to redeploy and so on. So I think that's one of the benefits they were mentioning when they did their case study, is the fact that, okay, we design for whatever we want. If we want a query that was taking 10 hours on the old legacy SOC that now takes 2 minutes, if I want it to take 1 minute, I put twice the resources. But also, if I want to do differently, it's my choice. And once there is something available, I can say, okay, I'm going to enable that because this is helping me. So
to add to that real quick, since I was on the customer side for almost 20 years, it is incumbent upon CIOs and CISOs, and I really think security aware CIOs, whatever you want to call them, but CISOs with business awareness, like that's kind of coming together, right? So, and a lot of times CIOs, CISOs, CTOs, it needs to come together. So I think that in this situation, it is incumbent upon these folks to make sure they understand what those roadmaps look like from their vendors, and that they're planning for that to be agile within their own business needs to serve the business that they serve. Because if you don't know what's coming, if you're not really investing that time to learn that or what's out there, you can't really do anything other than react. And then you're no better off than if you weren't using a service in a lot of ways.
Right. Very good point. So I think we're actually at time at this point. So I wanted to ask one last question. I mean, taking this all in, Cyril, from your position, a CISO advisor, David, CISO over at Bear, parting thoughts on, what's next? What would you like the audience to take away from this discussion?
Should I start?
Sure, Cyril.
Okay, so I think we're doing a job that is incredibly interesting, but also challenging.
Yeah.
Our jobs are not going away, although we mentioned machine learning and AI and all that, but we still have a lot to do. I also think that the biggest challenge we have most of the time is managing the technical debt, because we all know what a perfect organization would look like, but it depends on the means we have. So we need to be smart on how we use. So I know some customers are rationalizing, for instance, their security vendors, and that's something where Microsoft, we're happy to play a role. And on a personal note, I'm very excited about the perspectives around AI and ML, which are kind of a pet topic for me. And I think we're going to see spectacular improvements in the next couple of years. So if I were you, I would train some people in my team around this topic so that you can keep the relevance.
Yeah, and I think in building on that, I think that the thing is that for this industry, I mean, it's not something that you can just punch a clock on. That's not the way this part of the industry really works. I'm not saying you need to work 900 hours. What I'm saying is that you have to have a passion for what you do here, and because otherwise it will grind you to a very quick. Not have anything. So in understanding that, then the culture of the organization that you're working with has to be very, very, very prominent in what you're doing. And building that culture from the CIO and CISO level is very important, which means that you recognize the talent, you recognize what you're trying to do, and you help enable those people, not look to blame those folks. So I think that going forward, it has to be a much more aligned organizational situation between the CISOs, CIOs, and CTOs, to where you are enabling your people. We know we're in a difficult situation, right? We know we have tech debt here. Here's our plans to kind of put these fires out while we're building what the future looks like. And if you can kind of create that continuum and that kind of approach from the top that doesn't feel like that you're always trying to blame somebody if something goes wrong or whatever, then you'll see a lot of great organic type of growth in your knowledge base and in your people and their people skills.
Very good. So basically what you're both saying is cybersecurity is empowering. We just have to make sure that we push that message out. So
yeah, it is. Well, I mean, ultimately, because without it, you're just at the mercy. You want to control your own destiny in an agile way. That's really, no matter what you're dealing with, that's the important aspect. That's a business or a person. So that's the enabler.
Yeah.
And pick your partners, because you can stand on the shoulders of giants like Capgemini and Microsoft. And we're really here to make you benefit from our experience worldwide. So
Yes.
Don't reinvent the wheel just to put your name on it. Use what's out there. I mean, that's what I've done my whole career, because we don't have the bandwidth to just reinvent things all the time in this situation, because then you leave something else out there. So I would say, my primary driver and how I look at things is synthesize, standardize, ubiquitize, monetize. So in that situation is, that's if you can continually do that in an iterative cycle and an OODA loop, a Boyd's loop, then you'll have that agility that requires going forward.
Yep. Well, Cyril, David, thank you. This was a
pleasure,
really great
Anne.
session.
Pleasure, Cyril.
Yeah. So hopefully we'll get a chance to talk again. On behalf of Capgemini, thank you for coming along, Cyril. Thank you, David, again. And have a wonderful 2023, everyone.
Thank y'all.
Thank you.
Appreciate
Bye.
it now.